He abandoned the dog in the cold, but what the animal did the next day moved the whole country. Have you ever looked into the eyes of an animal and seen something that felt too human to explain? A silent plea. A question unspoken. Why? In the frozen silence of a back road near Aspen, Colorado, the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. The first snowfall had been heavy, blanketing everything in a stillness that muffled sound and feeling. Ice formed in thin layers on the asphalt, and the only movement came from a dusty old truck weaving its way through the narrow road, headlights cutting through the haze. Inside, the cabin was quiet. The man behind the wheel, mid-40s, unshaven, eyes dark with something heavy, kept glancing at the passenger seat. There, curled up and shivering, was a dog, medium-sized, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Fur, once golden, now matted and dirty. His eyes were full of the kind of loyalty that doesn't come from training, but from time, from memory, from belief. The truck slowed, turned onto a pull-off near an empty field surrounded by pines. It stopped. The man opened the door. For a moment, the dog looked up at him with cautious hope. Maybe they were stopping for a walk, maybe they were going home. But the man didn't speak. He reached over, grabbed an old wool blanket, a crust of bread from the dashboard, and tossed them into the snow. Then, without a word, he coaxed the dog out of the vehicle. The dog stepped into the snow, hesitant, tail tucked but still wagging faintly, still believing. The door shut. The engine started again, and just like that, he was gone. The red tail lights vanished into the trees, swallowed by snow and distance. The dog stood there, frozen, not just from the cold, but from confusion, from disbelief. He didn't bark, he didn't chase, he just stood, waiting. The minutes became hours. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the snow. Night fell hard and fast. The temperature dropped, the wind picked up, and the dog didn't move. His paws, already raw, began to bleed. His breath came out in visible clouds, quick and short. The crust of bread lay untouched. The blanket, a poor excuse for comfort, barely moved in the icy wind. Why didn't he leave? Because dogs don't understand betrayal the way we do. They don't rationalize. They don't analyze. They hope. Hope is what kept him there, staring into the darkness as if any moment now the truck would return, that this was all just a mistake, that the man who fed him, who sometimes scratched behind his ears when no one was looking, would come back and say, "Come on, boy, let's go home." But no one came. In a nearby town, as the sky turned to deep navy, a woman named Helen wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck as she walked the familiar road to the corner bakery. 68, small in stature but strong in will, she had lived in this town all her life. A widow, no children nearby. Her world had grown quieter over the years. Her daily routine, coffee at dawn, knitting by the fire, a single walk to the bakery, was all that remained of what once was a noisy, laughter-filled home. It was on this night, as she turned the corner onto Willow Road, that she saw him. At first, she thought it was just a shadow. But something in her gut, that deep maternal instinct that never truly fades, told her to stop. She squinted against the wind, stepped off the path, and followed her heart. There, in a patch of disturbed snow, curled into himself, but still very much alive, was the dog. She approached slowly, speaking softly, not words really, but a tone, a vibration of kindness. He lifted his head, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. A recognition not of familiarity, but of shared loneliness. A mirror. Helen knelt beside him, hands trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. "You poor thing. What did they do to you?" She didn't have to ask. She knew. The snow had begun again, light flakes swirling around them like pieces of time. She removed her scarf and wrapped it around the dog's shivering body. The wool blanket lay a few feet away, half buried. She gathered it, wrapped it over him and whispered, "You're not staying here." The walk home was slow. She cradled him as best she could, stopping often, resting when he was too weak to move. Her arms ached, her knees burned. But she didn't stop. Not until her front door opened and the warmth of her small living room met them like a lifeline. She laid him on a rug by the fire. His breathing was shallow but steady. She brought water in a bowl, chicken broth from the stove, and spoke to him constantly, naming him before he even had a chance to belong. "Chance," she said softly. "Your name is Chance." Not because he had one, but because she wanted to give him one. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She sat beside him knitting needles untouched, tea gone cold, eyes never leaving his body as it slowly began to release the tension of abandonment. Outside, the snow continued. Inside, two souls, both forgotten, both discarded in different ways, began to stitch something back together. And in the shadows of that living room, in the soft crackle of the fire and the slow rise and fall of a dog's chest, something extraordinary had begun. Not a miracle, not yet, but something like it. The world didn't know him yet, didn't know what he had endured, didn't know what he would do. But soon, they would. Chance didn't eat much the first day. Helen noticed it right away, how he sniffed at the bowl, then backed away, retreating to the worn rug beside the fireplace, as if food was something he no longer believed in, like it was part of a life that no longer belonged to him. She tried everything. Chicken, rice, a soft piece of buttered toast. But he only looked at her, those amber eyes full of something far heavier than hunger. It wasn't just that he had been left, it was that he hadn't understood why. Animals don't reason with abandonment like people do. They don't curse or rationalize or blame. They just feel. And when the person they gave their entire world to disappears, something in them shatters, something that doesn't quite mend the same again. Helen could feel it in him. She began sitting with him for long hours, sometimes in silence, other times telling stories from her own life. She told him about her late husband, George, and the way he used to hum old Sinatra songs while fixing the car. She told him about her daughter, who had moved across the country and now sent postcards but hadn't visited in years. She told him about how empty the house had felt lately, until that night in the snow. "I think we saved each other," she whispered one evening, as the firelight flickered across the walls. "You just don't know it yet." By the third day, he finally ate. Just a little. Just enough to spark something faint but vital, a glimmer of trust. And Helen, with the patience only a lifetime of heartbreak can teach, didn't push. She named him Chance, not just as a gesture, but as a declaration, a second chance, for both of them. Outside the house, winter continued to deepen. The snow grew heavier, and the sky hung low with grey clouds that rarely broke. But inside, a rhythm began to form. Chance would wake and follow Helen from room to room, careful to keep a few feet of distance, as if afraid he'd be punished for wanting closeness. Helen never reached for him, she just let him come. And slowly, inch by inch, he did. She took a photo one morning, him curled by the window watching the snowfall, and posted it to her social media. Her caption was simple: "He was abandoned in the cold. Now he watches, waiting. His name is Chance." She had a modest number of followers. Mostly old friends, neighbors, her bridge club, but something about the photo struck a chord. The image of that quiet, solemn dog staring out the window, backlit by a world of white, carried weight. People began to share it, comment, message, and then it spread. Within 48 hours, the photo had over 100,000 shares. News outlets reached out. Local reporters asked for interviews. Suddenly, Helen's quiet home became the epicenter of something vast, something deeply emotional, something collective. Everyone had their own chance. A dog they had lost, a pet they couldn't save, a part of themselves that still waited by some window for something or someone that never returned. The story made headlines. Abandoned dog found in snow. A nation falls in love with chance. Second chances. How one animal's loyalty is melting the internet's heart. But as the world watched, something unexpected happened. On the fifth morning, Helen awoke to an open door. The back door, which she was sure she'd locked the night before, stood slightly ajar, snow blowing in across the tile. Her heart dropped. She ran from room to room, calling his name, her voice trembling. Nothing. No sign of Chance. The food dish was untouched, the rug empty. She threw on her coat, boots over slippers, and stepped into the cold. Neighbors joined her search. Word spread fast. Cars moved slowly through the streets, windows rolled down, voices calling into the frosty air. Flyers were printed and taped to lampposts. People messaged from other towns. "I think I saw him here. Check near the old bridge. Dogs often go back to where they were left." Helen's heart broke with each passing hour, but then around midday a new post surfaced online. A hospital worker in the next town over had posted a photo. "This dog's been sitting outside the ER doors since early morning. He hasn't moved, just sits, watching everyone who goes in. Anyone recognize him?" Helen's phone lit up like a Christmas tree. She stared at the screen. The photo was grainy, taken from behind the glass doors of the hospital. But it was him, no doubt. His shape, his posture, the unmistakable set of his ears. It was Chance. She rushed there with a neighbor who offered to drive. Snowflakes clung to her coat, but she didn't feel them. She only saw the image in her mind. Chance, sitting in that cold, staring at doors that held no meaning for anyone else, but clearly meant everything to him. When she arrived, the scene was quiet. The hospital was busy but muted, the way places of grief often are. And there, exactly as pictured, was Chance, sitting, waiting. Helen approached slowly, fearing he'd run, but he didn't move. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her presence, then returned his gaze to the glass doors. "Chance," she whispered. He let out a sound. Not a bark, not a whimper. Just a low, almost inaudible breath that carried the weight of knowing. That was when a nurse stepped outside. I think I know why he's here," she said gently. Helen turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" The nurse hesitated. "We admitted a man 2 nights ago. Frostbite, pneumonia, multiple complications. He was brought in by someone who found him collapsed near the woods. He passed early this morning." Helen felt something cold settle in her stomach. The nurse continued. "Before he lost consciousness, he kept repeating something. 'Don't let him follow, he's not safe with me.' He didn't give us a name, but we checked the viral post this morning. I recognized the dog immediately. It was him, the man who had abandoned Chance. Not a monster, not cruel, not heartless. Just a man who was broken, by war, by life, by silence. A man who believed he was sparing his dog by letting him go. Chance hadn't known where. He hadn't seen where the man went. But somehow, through scent, memory, or something deeper, he had found him. Chance had walked for miles through the snow, through freezing winds and unfamiliar roads. He had waited by the one place that smelled like his person, the one place that held his final breath. He had come to say goodbye. Helen sank to her knees beside him. And for the first time, Chance didn't hesitate. He leaned into her, rested his head on her lap, and let out a long, tired sigh. The country had fallen in love with him, but in that moment he wasn't a symbol, he wasn't a headline. He was just a dog who had loved someone so much that even abandonment couldn't sever the bond. He had waited, he had searched, he had found, and now he was ready to come home. Helen didn't speak on the ride home. She simply sat with Chance curled beside her in the back seat of the neighbor's car, her gloved hand resting gently on his back. He didn't sleep, but his eyes were softer now, no longer scanning the world for something lost. There was a quiet between them that didn't need to be filled, the kind of silence that only exists between two souls who have been to the edge and come back. Snow continued to fall around them, slow and heavy, casting a white curtain over the town. The streets were almost empty. A few porch lights flickered on as dusk settled in. And when they arrived at Helen's house, she opened the door, let Chance walk in first, and watched him cross the threshold like someone who finally understood that he wasn't just being brought somewhere. He was being brought home. That night, Helen lit a single candle by the window. She didn't turn on the TV, didn't scroll through the endless stream of news alerts and social media notifications about Chance's story, now picked up by outlets all over the country. Instead, she laid out 2 bowls, one for food, one for water, and then sat on the floor beside the fire, where Chance had returned to rest. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw it. Not just resignation or survival, but trust, a readiness to begin again. She brushed his fur gently with a soft comb, untangling days of wind and snow. As she worked, she whispered to him, not to fill the air, but to root something deeper, a promise. "You're not going to be forgotten again," she said. "You're not going to be left behind. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what happened before. This is your last stop, and I'm going to love you for the rest of your days." Outside, the world kept moving. Headlines shifted, new stories emerged, but something about Chance stayed. People weren't ready to let him go. Letters poured in, gifts, donations to animal shelters made in his name. Schools held assemblies about kindness and responsibility. Parents used his story to teach their children about empathy. It was as if, for a brief, shining moment, one dog had cracked open a collective vulnerability. Reminded people what loyalty really looked like, what devotion felt like when stripped of ego and complexity. And then something even more unexpected happened. Helen received a call from a local veterans support group. A man named Miguel, who ran outreach programs for homeless and struggling veterans, asked if he could come visit. He had something he wanted to share. Not with the press, not with the internet, just with her. She agreed, and the next day he arrived. A quiet man in his 50s, Miguel had kind eyes, and the careful demeanor of someone who had lived through storms and learned to walk softly. He sat on Helen's couch, looked over at Chance, who watched him calmly from his usual spot by the fire, and then pulled out a folder. Inside were papers, medical, military, personal. "I think I knew the man who left him," Miguel said. "We served together a long time ago. His name was Daniel." Helen said nothing, but her eyes told him to go on. Daniel came back from the Middle East. Different, quiet, wounded, not just in the body, but here, he said, touching his temple. He couldn't hold a job, couldn't hold on to people. He told me once that the only thing that made him feel human again was this dog. Said he found him under a dumpster behind a gas station, half-starved. Nursed him back to life, called him Buddy, I think. Helen glanced at Chance, at Buddy, and the name sounded strange, like a ghost from a different life. But Daniel didn't ask for help. That was his problem. He thought needing people meant weakness. He tried to give the dog away a few times, but couldn't do it. Said Buddy was the only soul who didn't flinch when he had nightmares. Miguel swallowed hard. "I think when his health started failing, when the cold got too much, he thought letting the dog go was mercy. That someone better would find him, that he wouldn't have to watch him suffer." Helen's throat tightened. There was nothing to say that would change any of it. No words to undo what had happened on that frozen roadside, but knowing gave her something else, understanding. And with understanding came forgiveness. "Thank you," she said simply. Miguel stood, took one last look at Chance and said, "He waited for Daniel. That's what they do. Even when we fail them, they wait." After he left, Helen sat beside Chance, her fingers resting on his collar. She didn't cry. She just breathed, and for the first time in years, she felt the profound stillness of peace. Weeks passed, winter deepened, then began to pull away. The icicles melted, the streets turned to slush, and through it all, Chance remained by her side. He grew stronger. His fur thickened and regained its color. His steps, once uncertain, became more confident, but there was always something in his eyes, that quiet, soulful gaze of someone who had seen too much, who had waited in the snow and learned that love isn't a guarantee but a gift. Helen began taking him with her everywhere, to the bakery, to the post office, even to church, where the congregation welcomed him like an old friend. Children would run up to pet him. People called him the miracle dog, but Helen never used that word. To her, he wasn't a miracle. He was a survivor, a teacher, a reminder. One morning, a local school invited Helen to speak. She brought Chance with her. The children sat on the floor of the gymnasium, wide-eyed, silent, and Helen, holding Chance's leash, stood in front of them and told the story. Not with drama or embellishment, but with quiet, steady truth. She ended with a question. "Do you know what loyalty looks like?" She gestured to Chance. "It looks like this, like waiting in the snow, like walking miles to find someone who left you behind, like not giving up, even when every reason says you should. There was a long pause. Then a boy raised his hand. Why would someone leave a dog like that? Helen smiled, bittersweet. Because sometimes people are hurting so badly, they think letting go is the kindest thing they can do. But that's why we have to be better. For them, for each other, for the ones who wait. Later that night, as they returned home, Helen lit the fire and made tea. Chance rested at her feet, his breathing slow and steady. Outside, the first buds of spring were beginning to push through the frost. She watched him sleep and thought of Daniel, of pain, of healing, of how grief never really disappears. It just softens around the edges. And as she reached down to stroke his fur, she whispered, "Thank you for finding your way back, for choosing to stay." Because in the end, that's what his story had become, not one of abandonment, but of return, not one of despair, but of faith. And not just a tale about a dog, but a lesson for a country, for a people desperate for connection, for proof that even in the coldest moments, love finds a way back. Always.